It happened about 8 months ago, though I still think about it almost every night before I fall asleep. I live alone in a small, two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It's one of those older buildings with creaky wooden floors and slightly crooked door frames. Charming, I used to think. It was early spring then, one of those cool, drizzly nights when the rain just sort of hangs in the air, more mist than downpour. I'd spent the evening as I usually did, making dinner, scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone, and listening to the low hum of the city through the cracked window in my bedroom. The streetlights outside always cast these long, warped shadows through the blinds, striping the walls like a barcode. It was a comforting kind of solitude, the kind I had grown used to over the past couple of years. Around midnight, I got ready for bed. I remember noticing how quiet everything was that night, no car horns, no neighbors stomping around above me like they usually did. Just the faint patter of the rain and the occasional creak of the building settling into itself. I turned off the lights, got into bed, and lay there for a while, listening. That's when I first heard it, a soft, deliberate creak from somewhere out in the living room. Not the random groan of old wood expanding in the cold, but something slower, heavier. At first, I didn't move. I just kept listening, telling myself it was nothing, maybe the wind shifting something on the balcony, or one of the old windows flexing in the frame. But then it happened again. This time closer, as if someone had put their weight on the floorboard just outside my bedroom door. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, heavier, like all the oxygen had been quietly sucked out. I sat up slowly, heart thudding in my chest. I strained to hear anything over the blood rushing in my ears. For a long time, there was nothing. Just silence thick enough to taste. Trying to be rational, I told myself it was probably my mind playing tricks on me. I got out of bed and walked quietly to the bedroom door, placing my hand on the old brass knob. It was cold, colder than it should have been. I opened it just a crack and peeked out into the apartment. The living room was dark, except for the dull amber glow from the streetlight filtering through the blinds. Everything looked exactly as it should, my coat hanging by the door, the coffee table stacked with books, the faint outline of the armchair by the window. Nothing out of place. No movement. I almost laughed at myself and was about to shut the door when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a creak, but a soft, steady breathing, just beyond the kitchen archway, in the darkness. My whole body locked up. It wasn't my imagination. It couldn't be. It was slow, calm, like whoever, or whatever, was there wasn't in any hurry. I didn't know what to do. My phone was still on the nightstand, out of reach, and the thought of crossing the room to get it made my skin crawl. I stood there, frozen, listening to that breathing, rhythmic, measured, as if it had always belonged there, in my home. Then, almost imperceptibly, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. I felt the fine hairs on my arms stand up as I waited, expecting something. But nothing came. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly closed the bedroom door and locked it, backing away as quietly as I could. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up even though I knew how useless that was. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, staring at the door, ears tuned to every creak and sigh of the building until dawn finally broke. When the gray morning light filled the room, I finally found the courage to get up and check the apartment. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No signs of forced entry, no open windows, no disturbed furniture. It was as though the night before hadn't even happened. But here's the thing that still keeps me up. A few days later, I was cleaning under the couch, something I rarely do, and I found it. A small, smooth stone, about the size of a quarter, sitting there, tucked against the leg of the couch. I don't keep stones in my apartment. I don't collect them, I don't even walk through parks that often. It was just there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it got tracked in on my shoe, maybe a friend left it there at some point, but the presence of that stone felt deliberate, somehow. Like it was meant to be found. Since then, I've moved to a different apartment, in a newer building with solid floors and better locks. But every now and then, late at night when the world gets quiet, I swear I can still hear it, that slow, steady breathing, somewhere just beyond the walls. and I still have the stone. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe part of me is afraid that throwing it away might invite something back in, or worse, that it never really left. The apartment building where I live is old, one of those pre-war brick things that creaks and groans when the wind picks up. I've been here for almost a year now. It's not a bad place, quiet neighborhood, close to the subway, and the rent's reasonable. The hallway outside my door stretches in a straight line, pretty ordinary, lined with identical beige doors on either side, their numbers fading from years of paint. At the very end, past my door and a few others, there's one door that's always been locked. Room 12B. I've never actually seen anyone go in or out of it. The landlord never mentioned it, and when I asked once, he just shrugged and said, "Old storage, probably." But something about that door always felt off. Not frightening, exactly, just like it didn't belong. This all started a few weeks ago, late at night. I was coming home from work, my bag heavy with groceries and my mind already planning dinner, when I heard it. A soft knocking, slow and deliberate, coming from that locked door at the end of the hall. At first, I thought maybe it was just the building settling or someone moving something heavy inside. The kind of noises old buildings make when the city quiets down. But the knocking came again, steady this time, like a slow heartbeat. I stopped, setting my bags down carefully. The hall was empty, dimly lit by a flickering overhead bulb. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something I couldn't place, something almost like cold metal. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began. I stood there for a long moment, half expecting to hear it again. Nothing. Just the hum of the city muffled through the thick walls. Shrugging, I picked up my bags and unlocked my door, but the sound stayed with me, soft, insistent. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the knocking again, soft, patient, tapping out a rhythm that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone on the other side had forgotten their keys and was knocking for help. Maybe it was just the wind. But the knocking didn't stop. Over the next few days, it started happening more often. Sometimes in the early evening, when the sun was just dipping behind the buildings and the hallway was bathed in that deep orange light. Other times, just after midnight, when everything was swallowed by silence. I never heard anything else, no voices, no footsteps. Just the knocking. Always from that locked door. One evening, I was brushing my teeth, standing in front of the mirror when I heard it again. This time, it was louder, more urgent. A steady, deliberate knocking. I froze, toothbrush in midair. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was inside the building, but from the wall adjacent to my bathroom. My bathroom shares a wall with that locked room at the end of the hall. I remember the cold rush that hit me, the hair on my arms standing straight up. The knocking felt personal now, like it was trying to get my attention. I went to the door and pressed my ear against it. No knocking, just silence. Then, just as I was about to step away, a single, heavy knock came from the other side of my bathroom wall. Not loud, but unmistakable. The next morning, I asked the landlord again about the room. This time, he didn't shrug. His face went pale, and he looked like he was about to say something, then stopped himself. "That room's been locked for years," he said quietly. "Used to be a tenant who lived there, a long time ago. Left suddenly, never really explained why." "Did something happen?" I pressed. He shook his head. "Don't know. No one ever went in after she left." That night, the knocking started again, only this time, it felt closer. Almost like it was coming through the walls themselves, vibrating through the plaster and wood, into my bones. It wasn't just tapping anymore. It was a rhythm. Slow, then fast, then slow again, like Morse code. I tried to ignore it, but the sound burrowed into my mind, relentless. Then, one night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of knocking. But this time, it wasn't from the hallway or the wall. It was from inside my apartment. From the closet. My heart hammered as I lay frozen in bed, staring at the closet door. The knocking came again, slow and steady. I told myself it was probably a pipe or the building settling, but my body refused to calm down. I forced myself to get up and open the closet door. Nothing but empty hangers and a box of old shoes. I closed it and turned away, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The knocking stopped for a few days after that. Then it started again, but now it felt like it was answering me. One night, I banged on the wall near the bathroom. 3 hard knocks. Silence. Then, a single knock back. I knocked again. 2 knocks. I knocked a third time. 4 knocks. It was like a conversation, one I didn't want to have but couldn't stop. The next day, I tried to find out who the tenant was who used to live there. No one at the building office knew much, just that she left without warning, a few years ago. No forwarding address, no explanation. At some point, I realized the knocking was changing. It started to echo memories, faint whispers I couldn't quite catch, smells I hadn't smelled in years, like old books and rain-soaked earth. The knocking was alive. One evening, I sat at the end of the hall, near that locked door, just listening. The sound came again, but this time I swore I heard a voice beneath the tapping. A voice whispering, so faint I could barely make out the words. "Help me." The hairs on my arms stood up. The voice was desperate, pleading. I looked down the hall at the locked door. My fingers itched to reach for the handle, but I knew it wouldn't open. I don't know what's behind it, maybe nothing, maybe something that doesn't want to be found. But I can't stop hearing it now. The knocking, the whispers. They're always there, just beyond the edge of hearing. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what would happen if I tried to open that door. If I listened too closely or knocked back too many times. What might come through if it finally answered? For now, I just leave the door locked, the knocking echoing down the hall like a secret no one else can hear. And I wonder if it's waiting for me. It started last month, on one of those quiet, almost forgettable nights in late autumn. I live alone in a small suburban house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a typical 2-bedroom with a modest yard and a few security cameras installed around the perimeter. I'd gotten them after a couple of petty thefts in the neighborhood, nothing serious, just enough to make me a bit uneasy coming home late. The cameras had been a comfort at first. I'd check them out before going to bed, a little ritual, looking at the grainy black and white footage, watching the empty street, the rustling leaves, the shadows of trees swaying gently in the wind. I liked how ordinary everything looked on the screens, how peaceful. The night was silent except for the occasional car passing by, and sometimes the distant bark of a dog. The cameras captured all of it in near silence, save for a faint hum from the monitor itself. Then, about 3 weeks ago, things started to feel off. I noticed it on the footage one night after I'd gone to bed but couldn't sleep. The camera by the back door showed something strange. At first, it was subtle, a small flicker near the edge of the frame, like a quick shadow slipping past. I thought maybe a bird or a squirrel, but the movement was too fluid, too deliberate. I rewound and watched it again. The shadow wasn't cast by anything visible, it just seemed to glide along the fence line without rustling any leaves or triggering the motion sensor. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The next night, I watched the footage closer. Around 3:14 a.m., the front porch camera caught something that made my heart skip. A figure appeared on the porch, tall, thin, but distorted somehow. It didn't move like a person. It swayed gently, almost as if it was underwater, and there was this faint, pulsing glow around it, like the edges of its body were shimmering or dissolving. I stared at the screen, frozen, trying to make sense of it. It just stood there for about 5 minutes, then vanished. I checked outside immediately, nothing. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or a glitch in the camera. But that feeling of being watched grew heavier. By the end of the week, I began hearing sounds, soft scratching at the windows, barely audible whispering in the dark. Sometimes I'd catch a faint scent of something old, like damp wood and something faintly metallic, but I'd never find a source. My sleep was broken and shallow. Then came the night I wish I could erase. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I'd finally fallen into a restless sleep. The alarm on my phone woke me up. I thought maybe I dreamt it, but then I heard it, a faint tapping, like fingers drumming lightly on glass. I sat up and looked toward the window. The moonlight spilled softly into the room, but nothing was there. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera feed app. The screen split between my 4 cameras: front porch, back door, driveway, and the side yard. Then I saw it. On the side yard camera, a figure was slowly moving through the shadows. It wasn't like the one from before. This one was more solid, but its shape was wrong, limbs stretched at unnatural angles, almost like it was trying to fit itself into the space, but failing. Its face was hidden in darkness, but I could swear it was watching me, though I felt no eyes looking, just a cold emptiness where a face should be. I froze. The figure started creeping toward the back door. My hands trembled as I tapped the screen, zooming in. The figure stopped just out of reach of the camera's view, then shifted, almost like it sensed I was watching. I swear, it turned its head, or something like a head, directly at the camera. The screen flickered and went black. The house plunged into silence again. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might echo through the walls. I couldn't move. I waited there, listening, breath held, waiting for a sound, a knock, a breath, anything. But nothing came. The power kicked back on after a minute. I checked all the cameras, no sign of the figure. But when I looked at the footage again, the last few minutes before the blackout were corrupted, scrambled beyond recognition. It was like the camera had been deliberately blinded. The next day, I tried calling a technician, thinking maybe it was a malfunction, but all the equipment tested fine. Yet I knew what I saw. Over the following days, I kept watching the feeds, but the figure never appeared again. The house felt emptier, colder. The scent lingered now, that metallic dampness, subtle but unmistakable. I started locking every door and window twice, leaving lights on, even during the day. And then, last night, I found a message. It was on the back door camera feed. I went to review some clips from earlier in the week, and suddenly, as the footage played, words started forming in the dirt below the camera's view: "Don't watch." They weren't there when I checked outside earlier that day. The message appeared only on the video, etched into the ground in clear, deliberate letters. No one else could have done it. There was no sign anyone had been near the camera. I haven't told anyone else. How do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Even writing this now, I hesitate, but it's the only way to make sense of it. I've stopped watching the cameras for now. I keep the app closed, the monitors off. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is completely silent, I swear I can hear the soft tap 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 of fingers on glass, like a warning. Or a plea. I don't know what that figure was, or why it came to my home. But whatever it is, it knows I'm watching. And now, I wonder if not watching might be the real danger. Because some things don't want to be seen, and some things don't want to be ignored. It started a few months ago, in early spring. I had just moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, nothing fancy, really, but quiet and affordable. I remember that first evening clearly, the faint hum of distant traffic outside my window, the smell of rain lingering in the air, and the way the wooden floor creaked softly beneath my feet. It felt peaceful, almost comforting, like a fresh start. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I'd get home from work, make dinner, watch a little TV, and go to bed. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, nothing unusual in an old building, but they never came near my door. Sometimes, the streetlight outside flickered just as I walked past the window. Little things I ignored because, well, life isn't perfect, right? Then came the notes. The first one appeared taped to my front door one morning when I left for work. I wasn't expecting anyone, no packages or visitors, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. It said only one sentence: "I saw you leave at 7:03 a.m. No signature, no explanation. I thought maybe a neighbor was trying to be helpful, or maybe some prankster. I didn't respond. But the next day, another note. This one said, "Your coffee was cold when you left." It sent a small chill through me because I always made my coffee fresh every morning. How would anyone know that? That's when I started noticing subtle signs someone was watching me. The lights in my apartment would sometimes flicker when I was alone. My phone battery drained unusually fast, even when it was off. Occasionally, I'd hear soft tapping on the window facing the street at night, but when I checked, there was no one there. I told myself I was imagining things, or maybe just stressed. I even joked to a coworker about being watched. They laughed it off, but I could see the slight unease in their eyes. One evening, after a late shift, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. My heart hammered in my chest. I'm usually meticulous about locking up. I called out softly, "Hello," but no answer. I stepped inside carefully. Nothing was disturbed, except for a small envelope on my kitchen table. Inside was a folded piece of paper with my full address written neatly across the front, and underneath, a line that made my blood run cold: "I know where you sleep." I locked the door behind me, checked the windows, and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to call the police but doubted they'd take an anonymous note seriously. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old building sounded amplified, every shadow stretched just a little too far. Days passed, and the notes continued. Some described my routines: "You jog past the park at 6:15 a.m., or you stop at the corner store every Thursday." Others were more cryptic, like "The one who watches sees more than you know." I started feeling trapped in my own home. The street outside, once calming, now felt oppressive. I kept my blinds closed, lights on, and checked the locks obsessively. Then came the phone calls. No voice, just breathing. Heavy, deliberate breaths. Sometimes, faint whispering that I couldn't understand. I tried blocking the number. It kept coming from different lines. One night, I woke to the sound of shuffling downstairs. My heart pounding, I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept toward the door. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled faintly of something metallic, like rust or old blood. I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. That's when I saw it. A small piece of paper slipped under the crack at the bottom. I picked it up with shaking hands. Written in the same neat handwriting was a single sentence: "I'm closer than you think." From that moment, I stopped going out alone. Friends noticed I was distant, on edge. I didn't tell them why. Who would believe me? One night, around midnight, my phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number. "Look outside your window." Against every instinct, I pulled back the curtains. At first, I saw nothing but the empty street bathed in moonlight. Then, a shadow moved, just a flicker, but enough. I couldn't see a face, just a figure standing under the street lamp, staring up at my window. I slammed the curtains shut and locked every door and window. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I sat on the floor and tried to think, but my mind was racing. Who was this person? How did they know so much? Were they even human? Or something else? Days later, I found out the building had once been a boarding house, decades ago. There was a story about a tenant who vanished without a trace, leaving behind letters addressed to neighbors, describing their daily lives as if watching them from inside the walls. I didn't believe in ghosts, but maybe it didn't matter. I started hearing whispers behind the walls, faint and barely audible, like a voice just out of reach. One evening, I decided to leave. I packed a bag, intending to stay with a friend. But as I stepped outside, I found another note taped to my car windshield. This time it was different. "I've always been here. Waiting." I didn't look back as I drove away. It's been weeks since I left that apartment, but the feeling hasn't left me. I still check over my shoulder, jump at every unfamiliar sound. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my new place, my phone lights up with a message from an unknown number. No words. Just a location pin. It points back to that old apartment building. I don't know who, or what, watched me then, or if it still watches now. All I know is that sometimes, knowing someone can see every move you make feels worse than being alone in the dark. I've lived alone in this old house for about 6 months now. It's a modest two-story on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind where you rarely hear anything beyond birdsong or the occasional car passing by late at night. Nothing remarkable, really. I moved in during late autumn, drawn by the cheap rent and the peace it promised after a long stretch of noisy roommates. The basement was mostly empty when I arrived, a cold, unfinished space with concrete walls, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I didn't go down there much, just for storage or to grab boxes of stuff I wasn't ready to unpack. It always smelled faintly damp, like old earth mixed with a hint of something metallic. The air felt heavier down there, colder, especially in the evenings. One Sunday morning, I decided to clean up the basement a bit. I wanted to clear out some junk and maybe turn the space into a small workshop. I spent the better part of the morning sweeping and stacking boxes. When I finally looked down at the concrete floor, something caught my eye: faint footprints dusted in the thin layer of dirt near the steps. At first, I thought maybe I tracked them in myself, but the prints looked off. They were too small to be mine and too light, like they barely pressed into the dust. The pattern was strange, like bare feet with slightly elongated toes, uneven and irregular. They started near the furnace, winding slowly toward the basement door, then disappeared just as the stairs began. I froze. I'm the only one with a key, and I hadn't been downstairs in days before today. I shook it off as my imagination playing tricks, or maybe some leftover marks from the previous owner. Still, the image stuck in my mind. Later that evening, I found myself standing at the basement door again, the smell of damp concrete stronger, the air cooler than I remembered. I told myself it was just a house settling, shadows stretching longer than usual. But as I looked closer, I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible scuff on the bottom step, a smear of something dark. I wiped it with my sleeve, half expecting to find dirt, but it was slick, almost oily. That night, I woke to a strange noise. A soft scraping sound, like nails lightly dragging across wood, coming from below. My heart hammered in my chest as I lay frozen, listening. The house was otherwise silent, no wind, no creaks from the settling frame. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and I told myself it was a dream, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The next morning, I went down again. The footprints were back, fresh, this time more defined, as if someone had walked through the dust just minutes before. They led from the far corner of the basement, where there was nothing but old boxes, toward the stairs. My hands trembled slightly as I followed them up, half expecting someone to be waiting at the top. But the house was empty, silent as ever. I checked every lock, every window. Nothing was disturbed. I live alone. There's no one else here. That evening, the power flickered briefly, and the basement light went out while I was in the kitchen. I swear I heard a whisper, so faint I almost missed it, a breath of sound, just beyond the door frame. I called out, "Hello," but only silence answered. The next day, I set up a camera down in the basement. Not because I believed in ghosts or anything, but just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I placed it near the furnace, pointed at the footprints path. That night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of footsteps echoing softly on cold concrete, growing closer, then fading away into nothing. The following morning, I checked the footage. The camera was off. No power. I tried to turn it back on, dead. Strange, since it was fully charged the night before. Then I noticed something else on the lens. A faint smear, like a fingerprint, but not quite human. It was elongated, the lines uneven, just like the footprints. I felt that same chill pressing down on me again. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. I tried to ignore it, focusing on work, on normal life. But every few days, the footprints reappeared. Always starting in the same corner, trailing toward the stairs, vanishing just before the basement door. Always fresh, always small and uneven, like some creature not quite human had passed through. One night, I heard the scraping again, louder this time, just below the floorboards. It wasn't a dream. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the stairs, heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. At the bottom, the beam caught something moving, a shadow flitting across the far wall, too fast to be anything solid. A cold breeze brushed past me, smelling faintly metallic and damp, like rust and old blood. I called out, voice barely a whisper, "Who's there?" No answer. Just silence, thick and suffocating. Then the light flickered again, and in that brief moment, I saw it, a pair of eyes, reflecting back from the darkness. Small, unnerving, almost childlike but hollow, empty. I dropped the flashlight. The beam went wild, spinning around the room as a cold weight pressed down on my chest. I ran up the stairs, heart racing, slammed the basement door shut behind me. I shoved a chair under the handle. But I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind felt like it was coming from below, from those footprints, those eyes. Now, I'm sitting here writing this, still hearing the faintest scraping below my feet. I don't know what it is or what it wants. But I know I'm not alone in this house. And every morning, I find those footprints again, leading out of my basement, vanishing into the floorboards like they were never really there.